This is the Vision with Execution show. My name is Adam Torkelson. My guest today is Jim Marshall. He's an expert on a field called Septemics. I'm not even sure if I introduced that correctly as a field of study or not, but Jim is an expert on it. And I would definitely, personally, am interested in what that is, what you can do with it personally and professionally, and how it can help people. So, Jim, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Adam.
If you would take a minute or five and talk about yourself.
Okay. Well, I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena, which greatly aid in the understanding of people, from which I created a revolutionary practical philosophic system called Septemics and published it in the book, Septemics Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. I'm a polymathic intellectual, and my areas of expertise include psychology, philosophy, theology, science, parapsychology, engineering, mathematics, law, literature, history, metaphysics, military science, political science, physical culture, education, human potential organization, and music. And I hold a Bachelor of Science cum laude from City University of New York.
And where are you based out of right now?
Arizona.
Why Arizona?
I do very well in hot, dry weather.
Amen, brother. I live in Utah, and I don't do well in cold, dry weather, which is what Utah has a lot of the time. I wish I lived in Arizona, but married to a lady who does not like the heat, so we live in Utah. So, Jim, the point of my show is to talk about creating visions and executing on them.
Right.
And I'm not talking about visions that you have from doing acid or LSD or anything like that,
Right.
but real lucid, intentional thoughts and ideas that we as humans tend to do consciously and subconsciously,
Mm-hmm.
which results in our realities.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of nuance in all of that. And the area of Septemics that you invented, I think, has some implications for folks who want to be better versions of themselves. And so let's talk about, from a high level, a little bit of your research that led you to create this area of study and applied psychology, I guess.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me just tell you, Septemics is the philosophical science based on the fact that many phenomena related to humans occur in a sequence of 7 levels. Literally, the word septemics means of or pertaining to 7.
Oh, right.
Septemics comprises a collection of scales or sequences, each of which breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps. There are 35 such scales, each of which is unique, and between them, they span the spectrum of human experience, by which I mean any problem, difficulty, situation, dilemma, etc., that any person has that has anything to do with people can successfully be analyzed by one or more of these scales, usually more than one.
Okay, let's put this to a practical test then. My current situation is I'm the parent of an 18-year-old boy and a 14-year-old girl.
Right.
My 14-year-old, I have a difficult time connecting with her
Right.
emotionally, and I've tried various ways through athletics. I coached her basketball team. We got to the championship game even, and had no impact on our relationship one way or the other.
Right.
14-year-old girls in general are, generally speaking, changing in a lot of ways, and personality wise, physical, emotional. Help me understand how you would help me walk through better connecting with my daughter.
Okay. What you should do is Find your daughter's level on every septemic scale. And every time you do, you will have a realization. Since there are 35 scales, you will, if you do this, have 35 insights into what's going on with her. By the time you finish that, you will understand her better than she understands herself, because you'll know with specificity and correctness exactly what she's about. Now, let me tell you a little bit more detail about that. Every person is at some level on every scale.
Okay, let's take a pause. Where do we find these scales?
They're in the book,
Okay,
Septemics Hierarchies of Human Phenomena.
so we are basically, if we want to use the scales, the 35 scales, we got to read the book.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, even if somebody were to hand you the scales, without reading the book, you wouldn't know what to do with it.
Right.
This is an entirely new subject. And it also happens to be a life-changing subject. The way people experience this, and I've been watching people do this for 29 years now, is it's like holding up a lens and either looking at yourself in the mirror through this lens or looking at another person through the lens. You see better. It's like Sherlock Holmes going around with the lens looking at things, you know. But each of these scales is a lens which enables you to understand either yourself or another much better. And it's all based on natural law. Let me tell you how I figured this out, because that's relevant. The story really begins when I was accepted into engineering school at the age of 16. Now, of course, I thought at the time that I would be engineering physical things like airfoils or motors or gears or whatever. But by the time I had my bachelor's degree, it was clear to me that I wanted to engineer the human psyche, because it is the area of which we know the least, it's the area of greatest mystery. More importantly, it is the area in which we as a race are failing miserably. 95% of the problems in industrialized society are because people don't understand people. Don't understand the wife, don't understand the daughter, don't understand the boss, don't understand the cousin, don't understand the partner, et cetera, et cetera. And this book solves that problem across 35 axes. So there are these 35 different skills, each of which addresses a certain area of human existence. And many people have told me that I've covered it all. In other words, there's nothing left out as regarding human affairs. If I may, I'd like to tell you the names of the 35 scales, so then you know exactly what subject matter is addressed here.
Go for
Okay?
it. Yeah.
So of the 35 skills, 24 of them I call individual skills. They apply to an individual, and 11 of them apply to a group. So these are the individual scales: the scale of basic purposes, the scale of personal influence, the scale of choice, the scale of permeation, the scale of thought, the scale of identity, the scale of evaluation, the scale of motivation, the scale of control, the scale of stopping, the scale of scholarship, the scale of literacy, the scale of human ability, the scale of memory, the scale of spiritual identity, the scale of mental deletion, the scale of aberration, the scale of physical fitness, the scale of justification, the scale of belief, the scale of equanimity, the scale of attack, the scale of conflict, and the scale of reaction. And these are the group scales: the scale of relationships, the scale of life spheres, the scale of government, the scale of civilization, the scale of survival, the scale of management, the scale of exchange, the scale of communication, the scale of allegiance, the scale of sexuality, and the scale of politics. Any one of these scales by itself could dramatically change the life of the reader. And I'll give you an example. I mentioned the scale of motivation. One of the most important things to know is someone's motivation. Why is this person doing this? That's how the police solve crimes. They look for someone with a motive, and that's who they investigate. So you could ask yourself, what's my mother's motivation toward me? What's my daughter's motivation toward me? What's my son's motivation toward me? What's my boss's motivation toward me? Et cetera, et cetera. And you could ask this question for every person you know and every person you have ever known. So we're talking about 2, 3, 4, 500 different questions. Every time you get a correct answer, you'll have an insight. That explains why Joe did that. One of the ways you know you found the right level is that you have an insight from it. If you don't have an insight, you found the wrong level.
Hmm.
Then you could reverse the vector and say, what is my motivation toward my girlfriend? What is my motivation toward my next door neighbor? What is my motivation toward my Aunt Mildred, et cetera, et cetera? And you could use it that way, another 3 or 4 or 500 different ways. Now, by the time you finish this exercise, the whole subject of motivation in your life would have been resolved because you know everyone's motivation toward you and your motivation toward them. Now, you have to realize that the trick here is that I got it down to the 7 basic human motivations. That was the heavy lifting. Now, you could say, well, there are thousands of motivations. Yes, but they're subsets of these.
And I
So,
would say, even more simplistically, there are only two basic motivations: fear and love, and everything else are subsets of that. And I know you've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I've spent maybe a year of my life thinking about what I'm motivated by. And I have a background in addiction recovery. So that's kind of the bias. That's my lens through which I look at things.
right.
And I'm also a very Christian religious person. And so that's my other biased lens as well.
Mhm.
So love and fear are two very prominent themes in both religion and in addiction recovery.
Right. Okay. So, let's take your daughter, right? If you say, what is my daughter's motivation toward me? When you get that, you'll say, oh, that's why she said that, because you'll have an insight. Now, as I said, I would recommend you find her level on every scale, and you'll understand her better than you can imagine right now. Because, as many people have said, this book is an eye opener. This brings to people concepts and ideas and ways of thinking about things that didn't exist before, that they didn't have. This is an entirely new subject, and it's all based on natural law. So let me finish telling you how I figured this out. So I had a long career as a human development engineer, working one-on-one with hundreds of clients of every description for cumulatively many thousands of hours. All of my clients improved as a result of our interaction. But I started to notice incidentally that I could predict the outcome of the session.
Could I ask a dumb question?
Sure.
What is a human development engineer?
A human development engineer is a person who works with individuals to help them resolve their issues, their unwanted conditions, and so forth, using engineering principles, tactics, devices, and so forth. It's an entirely it's not counseling, it's not psychotherapy, it's something completely different. And it's based entirely on natural law, which is why I got uniformly spectacular results on all my clients. So I'd get some guy who would come into me and say, Jim, look, I've been having this problem with my wife. It's gone on for 3 years. I don't know what to do. I can't figure it out. So we get together, get in a session. I'm using my biofeedback on him, right? Watching. And in 20 minutes, he says, wait a minute. Now I see she's just like my mother. Now I see what's going on. Now he's very happy about that. He understands her better now. So I said, okay, let's go on to something else. So that's how it worked. It was I would say very little to the person. What I actually did is I used Socratic dialogue aided by biofeedback, a very sophisticated use of biofeedback. In case you don't already know, uh, every time you think a thought, the electromagnetic field around your body changes. And this is easily read on an ohm meter because the resistance in your body changes when those electromagnetic fields change. And in fact, they change in very specific ways. So if a person is upset, it looks one way on the meter. If a person is angry, it looks another way on the meter. If a person has a secret, it looks another way on the meter. So I can know exactly what's going on.
So
So,
there's a machine, a biofeedback machine
right,
that you use in all your sessions that,
yes,
for lack of a better term, points at whatever the feeling is these people are having, because those vibrations or the fields of energy, they all look the same, whether I'm angry or my daughter's angry or my wife's angry. Anger is always going to show up in the same way on that scale for all people.
Well, more or less. I mean, your particular anger manifestation might be a little bit different from somebody else's manifestation. They're not going to be identical. But think of it this way, every rose in the world is unique and every tulip in the world is unique. But I can always tell the difference. I can always tell a rose from a tulip, even though they're unique.
And you
So,
have to be trained in how to use that machine to be able to understand those
yes,
differences.
it took me decades to master this,
Who
to
created
become
that
a.
machine, by the way? Do you know?
The machine I'm using, there are many, but the one I'm using comes from a company in the San Francisco area called Clarity Meters.
And why did you choose them? I know this is a weird tangent, but
Yeah,
I'm just
I
curious.
happen to know this guy uh, who I had met several times. We had similar interests, and he developed this meter. And so I bought one and I found it worked brilliantly and I just kept using it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So,
Let's
so,
go
any,
back to
so anyway,
in a
getting
session.
back to Septemics. So
Yep.
I could predict the outcome of the session. I never told this to anybody, but I made notes. And as the decades rolled by, it became obvious to me that the client would be at a specific level on a specific scale that I had previously observed and recorded. And as a result of our interaction, he would go up to the next level on that scale when he had this epiphany. And that told me that this happened thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And every time it did, it verified my hypothesis because the clients knew absolutely nothing about any of this. They didn't know what I was doing, how I was doing it, what I was recording, or anything. All they knew is they came to me with some unwanted condition or problem, and I helped them resolve it. That's all they knew.
And
Now,
how did you find these people? How were they referred to you?
well, I started getting involved in what you might call alternative subjects when I was still an undergraduate. Uh, I was going to college, but then, like evenings and weekends, I would study these other things. And I found that I had what you might call a natural talent. Actually, I discovered when I was about 16 that I could establish a rapport with a complete stranger in 15 minutes, which most people can't do. Now, in that context, I discovered this just because as a 16-year-old boy, I was very interested in 16-year-old girls. So I'd go to a dance and I'd meet some girl. Oh, you live in Queens. What part of Queens? We get into a conversation. And in 10 minutes, she's telling me her whole life story. So this was some ability that I had that I could just use. So my ability to establish a rapport with people was there. And so when I started working with people in these various alternative fields, I found I could very easily get results from people. They would open up to me. They would trust me. And once I, learned how to use biofeedback, that just made it, instead of a cart, a rocket ship. So I could do this really fast. So a guy comes into me, right? Never met him before. I say, okay, let's have a talk, right? And I'm interviewing him, but he's on the meter. And I say, well, how's your relationship with your father? Okay, how's your relationship with your mother? And the meter goes, boom. I make a note of that. So we get into the session. I say, tell me about relationship with your mother. Boom. Now, as he's talking, I'm getting more specific things. I'm getting an indication that's telling me he has secrets from her. So I'd say to her, do you have a secret from your mother? How did you know? Yes. Tell me about it. And that would open up a whole path of things that didn't even remember. And we would trace it back to when he was 13 and he was smoking behind her back and he didn't want her to know. And she almost found out. And that sort of hurt her. And so this sort of digs up a whole bunch of stuff from his subconscious. And so he has a big epiphany. Wow, now I see what happened with me and my mother, because before that we had a good relationship, see? That's what happens with Septemics, because I just took this data and put it in a book so people can use. So what happened was, by 1995, I had simply observed and recorded about 32 scales that varied in length between 3 and 7. And these were just, there's no theory of Septemics. This is just direct empirical observation, and I was just recording it. And I would see the same manifestations on other people who didn't know one another, who didn't know me, the exact same phenomena. So one day in 95, I was pondering a difficult case, and I realized that this client was at a level on one of these scales that I had not previously observed. I had this 6-level scale that I absolutely knew was correct. But then I realized, there's actually a 7th level. Now, as soon as I saw what that level was, it was obvious to me where to insert it. That wasn't a question. And as soon as I inserted it, at that moment, that scale went from being a line, which is what a scale is, to a plane, meaning a whole body of data. In other words, all this data jumped out at me without my looking for it. That is a mathematical phenomenon. That is what goes on in math. You start with a formula or a function, and you coax data out of it. That is how Einstein found E equals mc squared, right? He worked with the math, and all of a sudden he gets down to E equals mc squared. He says, wow, this is big. I found something here. There's a conversion rate between matter and energy, and the factor is c squared. So that's what was happening with this. All this data jumped out at me, and suddenly I had this whole body of data, not just a scale, a whole plane. And it was filled with all of these interlocking, mathematical, intersecting data. Now, having taken 26 semesters of math and having loved every minute of it, math is a very real thing to me. When it's there, I see it. So I said, whoa, I found something here. Whatever this is, it has to be natural law because it's got mathematics embedded in it. And anything that has mathematics embedded in it is natural law, like, for example, the Fibonacci sequence. So uh, people have said to me, what book is your book like? And I have to say, having gone to school for 28 years, I don't think there's ever been a book like this before, but each one of these 35 scales is expressed in the book what you could call a table or a spreadsheet. And each of those is very similar to the periodic table of elements. Now, before Dmitri Mendeleev created the periodic table, there was chemistry, but he revolutionized it. He made it easier to learn, easier to teach, easier to understand. He had, I think, 79 elements. And because the model works, as we discovered more elements, we just kept adding them in. So now the periodic table, that's got something like 125 elements now. It's in every textbook and every classroom of science in the world in whatever language they speak. That is what these tables are like. So when I saw that first one, I said, wait a minute. I wonder how many of these other tables that I have are actually 7-level scales that had not been developed all the way. Because you have to realize I wasn't developing anything. I was just helping my clients and making notes. So now, knowing what I was looking for, I studied these other scales. And in a short period of time, each of them developed into a 7-level scale. And when it did, it manifested mathematically. So in a short period of time, I now had 32 7-level scales, all of which had mathematics embedded in them and was expressed in a table. I said, whoa, this looks like a new subject to me, one that could really help people. Because if I were to put this in a book and get it out, I could go from helping people by the hundreds, which is what I have been doing, to helping people by the millions, because they could get this book and read it and use it in their lives. So I'm going to have to write a book. So the first draft was finished in December of 95. And as soon as it was done, I sent it out to colleagues of mine, all of whom had graduate degrees in a variety of subjects. And they all responded in a short period of time very positively, very enthusiastic. They had different responses, but distinctly positive responses. Now, that was 29 years ago. I then spent the next 25 years of my life working on this book. Because first I had to discover the phenomena, and I pretty much told you how I did that, although I did find three more skills as I was writing the book. Then I had to take that data and use it to craft a workable philosophic system. Now, as an engineer, I'm only interested in facts and results, like every other engineer. To engineering, opinions and beliefs are utterly irrelevant. So I had to create something that would work all the time for every person who could read English. And I know I succeeded at that because I've been watching people respond to this for 29 years now, since the first version came out. So after I developed this, the next thing was expressing it in a way that would make sense to the average reader. Because my intent from day one was to help the people of Earth with this. So it had to be something that people could just pick up and look at it and get it. And they do. I know I succeeded at that because for 29 years I've been watching people read this and look at it and get it. I'll give you an example. About 25 years ago, while I was working on the book, talking to a buddy of mine about politics and government, just standing around talking. And I realized, wait a minute, I've got this scale of government. Let me show it to him and see what he thinks. He didn't even know I was writing a book. He didn't know anything about this. So I just opened up the book to the scale of government and handed it to him. I did not say a word. So he took it and he looked at it. And in 1 second, he pointed, just like that, and said, I'm right there. He found his level on that scale without my even suggesting that that's what it was for. He didn't know that. That's how easy this is to use. So a guy opens up the book, right? Let's say the scale of choice, and he's going down and he gets to, let's say, level 5. He says, wait a minute, this is my father-in-law. This is exactly how he behaves, just like this. No, I don't know this guy's father-in-law. I probably don't even know the reader. How did I get that so exactly? It's because it's natural law.
Okay, Jim,
Yeah,
we are basically out of time.
okay.
It sounds like you could talk about this for a lot longer. And one of the things I'm probably going to mess around with later is the length of my episodes. But right now, try and keep them to 30 minutes.
Okay.
Can people get your book on Amazon?
Yes.
Okay. And is it best, do you think, to get the physical copy so that they can?
It depends on what you prefer and how much money you want to spend. Obviously, there's a hardbound, there's a softbound, there's an ebook. You know, they get less expensive as you go from hardbound down to ebook. So, you can get the ebook for like $10, and it's a small investment. But I find most people who read books want an actual physical copy of a
Okay.
book.
I'll put a link to it in the description of the podcast when I publish it. And are you interested in taking on consulting clients as well?
Sure.
I mean, you tell me, but that's typically what I find people do when they're publishing books. They,
Uh,
at least nonfiction self-help
right.
type books, they do like to coach and consult because that's, like you said, you wrote the book for that reason. You like to help
Right.
people.
Right.
And in-person coaching and consulting, or virtually, that does tend to marry well with a book on how to approach life like you've done.
Right.
So if that's something you're open to, then let's say yes, you do work with clients. And if you've got a website, I'm going to put it in the show description as well. Well,
Septemics.com.
perfect. So Jim, it's been interesting and eye-opening for me to have you on. I didn't get to ask you the two typical questions, but maybe I'll have you on again later and maybe get into a little bit more of your personal background and some of the things that you're doing with yourself and trying to improve yourself, because
Mm-hmm.
it's always good to hear how people are using the things that they are experts in on their own selves.
Hmm.
I feel like it's, walking the walk, so to speak,
Yes.
and talking the talk. So, Jim, it's been a pleasure. This has been the Vision with Execution show. My name is Adam Torkelson, and you can listen to this on Spotify or YouTube, or we'll have it online shortly.